Okay, Alexander, let's look once again at the United Nations, the Security Council, and the rising role of France with regards to Israel and Palestinians and the Israeli-Gaza conflict, and the fact that France is pushing for a ceasefire, but it looks like Washington is not so keen on having France take the lead in this. But on the flip side, Washington, the United States, is not really going one way or another. So once again, we're kind of stuck in this stalemate. Nothing is really moving forward on trying to get the fighting to stop. Meanwhile, Netanyahu has said that he's determined to push ahead with the conflict. I have read reports that Hamas has said they're working on a ceasefire. I don't know if those reports can be trusted, but that's what I have read on certain outlets. So what do you make of the situation, the rising role of France, the inability of the United States to decide one way or another how it wants to proceed, and Netanyahu, Hamas, and everything going on?
I think that it's the second one that's the really key to this, to understanding all of this. The United States doesn't want the Security Council to meet. It basically, as we said in our previous video, it didn't do very much at the last session of the Security Council last Friday. It did everything it could to prevent that meeting taking place, and then when it did take place, it reduced it to meaningless generalities. It doesn't want the Security Council producing a statement, and it is extremely unhappy about the fact that the French are putting together a ceasefire resolution. The reason they don't want any of this to happen is because it exposes their actual lack of action in relation to this crisis. They don't want the other people taking it over from them, but at the same time, they can't actually do anything substantive themselves. So in effect, they are like a huge block. It won't move, it can't move forward, but at the same time, it obstructs everyone else from taking any step at all. And just to get an idea of how passive this whole thing is, consider the fact that the US Congress, I think almost uniquely now, has not issued any kind of resolution or statement about this. Now, normally the US Congress does. Normally it's a very strong pro-Israel comment. This time it's not happening because of these divisions within the Democrats, with the left of the Democratic Party, which is strongly in the ascendant, wanting the United States to take a more pro-Palestinian position. So the administration is stalemated. It's in the US, and it's stalemated in the Middle East also. It can't take a strong position, and it's blocking movement by everyone else. At the same time, Emmanuel Macron would not be Emmanuel Macron if he didn't sense here an opportunity to put himself in the front line, to grandstand, to assert himself as the great statesman who is going to settle the situation in the Middle East. So he sees this, or senses this passivity on the part of the US, and he's grabbing the opportunity to gain attention by proposing these resolutions to the Security Council. He knows that most of the members of the Security Council would support what the text of the French resolution, at least what we know about it. But he knows that it creates problems for the United States, and so he is essentially signaling to all the parties that as the US is really out of the picture, Macron, is the person they should all turn to, because he's the person who can chart the way forward. The resolution, by the way, doesn't just call for a ceasefire, or rather, I should say the draft resolution. It doesn't just call for a ceasefire. It calls for peace initiatives and work to be taken towards establishing a two-state solution. It doesn't really give an idea of what the roadmap to that is, but again, the implication is that France should play the leading role. And that isn't going to happen. I mean, as I said, it's grandstanding, it's posing by Macron, but it will annoy the Americans, and it will annoy the Americans, but it exposes the hollowness of their own policies at the moment.
Is this a good resolution, you think, like a good way forward? My question is more, maybe I'm phrasing it wrong. I don't want to say what's in it for Macron.
No.
What I want to say is there's obviously political motives that Macron is angling towards. Are they domestic? Are they international? Maybe they're a little of both. He is entering an election season soon. But is the proposal, outside of all the motivations of Macron, is the proposal genuine? That's what I kind of want to ask. Is it genuine from the standpoint of France? Because France, is a player in the Middle East, and it does have a presence and a history, a very deep history. So is there a sense of this being a genuine push for some sort of peace, or is this more of a Macron political thing?
I'm afraid I think it's the second. First of all, the ideas set out in the resolution are entirely conventional. They're the ideas that have been floating around about how to settle the problem in the Middle East ever since the 1967 war. I mean, it's completely standard stuff. It makes no original proposals or ideas. It doesn't provide an actual roadmap forward, an actual set of steps the parties need to take in order to achieve that destination which it says should be aimed at, which is the two-state solution. And France is in no position to actually pursue that, because even though France does have a presence, a diplomatic presence in the Middle East, it's not a player in the way that, say, the United States in the past has been a player. It just doesn't have that kind of power, hasn't had that kind of power since the 1950s, when France withdrew from the Middle East and has not had a significant role in the Middle East since then. So it's Macron again coming up with the same ideas that other people have come up with before, putting them together in a resolution. He knows many people will support that resolution because, as I said, it's uncontroversial in what it says. But he has no real plan for the Middle East. In that respect, it's not a resolution made in good faith. And it's not a resolution which, if it were to carry, would make any substantive difference to the situation in the Middle East. But I do think it is important, because what's happening is that in the absence of the United States taking a lead, we see a country which is a US ally positioning itself to do so in the US's place. And if you like, it's almost a rebellion in the UN Security Council against the US. Now, can I just make an observation? And I know some people are not going to be entirely thrilled by what I say, but nothing like that ever happened when Donald Trump was president. There was never any doubt at all when Donald Trump was president about who was calling the shots in the Middle East, and that the United States was making the key decisions there. The French would never have put forward a resolution like this at that time, just as they would not have put forward this kind of resolution previously under previous administrations. The fact that they are doing so now is an indication of the fact that even the US's most loyal allies, and perhaps Macron is not the most loyal ally, but even the US's allies are starting to sense that the US is drifting. And they're saying to themselves, in that absence of US policy, maybe we can find a place for us. Maybe this is an opportunity for us to take the lead. And it's a symptom, if you like, an indicator of a perception of weakness on the part of the United States, which is growing in the Middle East itself and in Europe also.
Because there are a lot of protests in Europe, do you think that Macron may be pushing this in order to maybe score some election points? You know, because there are a lot of people in France that are that are upset and that are on the, at least the demonstrations have been very much pro-Palestinian, I think all across the board in Europe. So maybe Macron is doing this to boost his election chances.
Absolutely, of course he is. And, he's a politician. One shouldn't surprise that he's doing that. Of course I think it's principally about that. He's got a very difficult election in France next year. He is positioning himself as the great statesman, the person who's going to settle the Middle East, who's putting France politically on the map, who's going to make the breakthrough in the Middle East, and who's going to show up the Americans. And remember, there's always mixed feelings about the US in France, and that's putting it mildly, that he's going to, show the Americans that, they may not be the best people to sort out these problems, and that France can do things where they can't. So, of course, he's doing that. And it will gain some traction. Whether it will impress enough people in France is an entirely different thing again. And I would add that, yes, most of the protests in places like France have been pro-Palestinian, but one should not underestimate the very strong pro-Israeli sentiment that there is in countries like France also. So, let's not overlook that too. Whether it would impress people in France is another matter. But undoubtedly, he is looking at this with an eye to the election next year. He could project an image now to the French people as the strong French leader in the fashion of General de Gaulle, who is actually going to take big steps in the Middle East and is going to lead France into a position of importance and authority. He's played that game many times during his presidency. It is in fundamental contradiction to his underlying policy, which is to integrate France ever deeper into the European and globalist structures. Most French people see through it. I don't think this is going to be a political game changer for him, but that is exactly what he is trying to do. But I repeat again, he would not be doing it. He would not be in a position to do it if the United States were taking a stronger role and if people sensed that it was the United States in the Middle East that's still calling the shots. This is a symptom of a general perception in Europe, in the Middle East, and around the world of a administration that is adrift, what we in Britain called AWOL, absent without leave, if you prefer.
Yeah. Okay. So we're learning a lot from on a geopolitical level from this conflict. The first thing that we are learning is, as you said, we're learning that the White House under Biden is completely adrift, confused, AWOL, missing in action, however you want to call it. We understand that. We also understand now that the United States' enemies, as well as their allies, are sensing this and they're making moves, whether that's France, whether that's Iran, Russia, China, whichever country you're looking at, they see that the U.S. is adrift and they're making different moves. In this case, we're seeing that France is saying, okay, maybe we can, gain some power on the international stage and gain some more leverage and power in the UN Security Council, etc. In the Atlanticist kind of alliance, we can push ourselves forward. So you see that as well. You also see Israel, Netanyahu, kind of saying, you know what, I don't have the U.S. to tell me one thing or another, to pull me back or to dictate any of the terms to me going forward. So I'm going to continue to push forward in this conflict. So he's just not even factoring the United States. We see that from Israel. We also see, and this is the interesting part, we see the Democrat Party is completely a mess. They try to portray this image of being this together united party, but we see in the case of the Squad versus the Schumers and the Pelosi's, like you said, they don't want to come out with a statement because obviously they don't want to piss off the Squad. So it kind of makes you wonder who's really running the show in the Democrat Party. Obviously, in the past, if you didn't have the Squad, I would put money on it that Pelosi and Schumer and all of these establishment Democrats would come out with multiple statements being pro-Israel. That's the first observation where, the curtain is being pulled with regards to the Democrat Party, and that they really are not that united, especially on the foreign policy level. And finally, given all of the things that I've said, why can't the United States, at least at a most basic level, put an end to the conflict? And everyone, France's resolution, the United Nations, Israel, the Palestinians, everyone just put the two-state solution on the back burner for a while and just at least stop the conflict. And then you can get through all the difficult, you could, re-examine the peace process or how to bring about peace, which has been just incredibly tough over the decades, but at least stop the conflict. Why can't the United States say, you know what, just stop the conflict here. Let's just stop. It seems that they can't do that. My follow-up is, why can't the United Nations do that? Why can't Russia or China do that? At least someone just say, please, let's just stop the fighting here. And then we can talk about everything else. Let's not bring up two-state solution. Let's not bring up anything else. Let's just put an end to the conflict and the bloodshed.
Right, let's talk about quickly the Russians and the Chinese. They're just sitting back and letting things work their way through, because they probably calculate that the situation at the moment is working to their advantage. What they sense is a US retreat from the Middle East, and they don't want to do anything that will complicate that process, because they want to see the US essentially move out of the Middle East. Their primary interest at the moment, I suspect, at least for the Russians, is consolidating the Assad government in Syria, where the Saudis are now in negotiations to reopen the embassy, and where Syria is likely to rejoin the Arab League very soon. They want the American troops to get out of Syria, and they want to see these negotiations between the Saudis and the Iranians come to fruition. So they don't want to do anything that will complicate that. And the one thing they don't want to do is to start taking diplomatic action, which might make the Americans more involved in the Middle East again and give a role for the United States in the Middle East. And the Chinese, who are further away from this issue, probably are in deep consultation with the Russians, and I'm sure they agree with that. But let's go back to the underlying issue. Why is the United States unable to broker a ceasefire, to do the things he said? Why is it taking no real position of any kind in the Middle East? I think, and this is something we need to understand, it is that globalization, the political force, the economic force, the ideological force that has been driving policy in the West now for so long, and which has completely undermined the viability of governments in Europe, has now started to have the same effect on the US government too. It is no longer the strong government that it used to be. And as a result, it is unable to make the kind of decisions that it once did, and it doesn't have the power, perhaps, to project force and to impose its decisions as it once did. This crisis that we are seeing now in the Middle East, to me, and I don't say this with any pleasure, is the first crisis that points to the post-American world. That is an extraordinary thing to say, but that is how it's starting to look to me. Of course, it may be that we will see a turn back. We will see somebody take control in the United States again in the future, reassert policy, try to take major steps that will bring American power to bear in the Middle East. But when that was attempted under Trump, well, we saw what happened. We saw how strong the forces which undermined it were, and I question whether that is possible any longer. So we have to start preparing ourselves for the post-American world, a world where in many areas, in many regions, the United States not only is no longer the great superpower that it once was, but where its opinions are becoming completely irrelevant. So the President of the United States telephones Benjamin Netanyahu. They have all kinds of intricate discussions. Bear in mind the President didn't initially want to speak to Netanyahu. He was very reluctant to engage with Netanyahu at all, but he did eventually. He talks to Netanyahu. Netanyahu pays absolutely no attention. Neither does the other side. Hamas, neither did the Palestinian Authority, neither does anybody. They all do what they must do. They listen politely to what the Americans tell them, and they simply ignore what they say. And in the meantime, the US has no political will or energy to become involved, and all the other great powers are circling. The Russians, the Chinese, as I said, the French are doing their own thing in the Security Council, and in the meantime, the other big players in the Middle East, Iran, Saudi Arabia, Egypt, Syria, are starting to work things out for themselves. So this is in a way, a catalyst moment. We've been talking ever since the new administration came to office in Washington about how hollow it looks. You're now seeing it. You're now seeing it in fact, and you're seeing it express itself in ways like this. It's a dangerous moment for the United States. It's a dangerous moment for the world because, of course, that neocon tendency is always there, and this is going to make them extremely disturbed and very angry, and they might try and hit back in all kinds of dangerous ways. But that is what you're seeing now.
All right, we'll leave it there. Guys, look for us on Odyssey, on SuperU, on Locals as well, and on BitChute. Join us on all of those free speech platforms, and also go to the Duran shop. Put the code REALNEWS, and you get 10% off all Duran merch, 10% off everything on the Duran shop. You'll find all those links down below. Take care.